8 in the morning. The ticking of the wall clock sliced through the air, thin and cold as paper. I sat across from Chase Halpern, who'd just walked in wearing a white shirt so crisp it looked ironed by fear itself. Beside him was a steaming latte, set neatly next to a slim folder, too neat to be innocent. I'd been with Ardent Technologies for 15 years, long enough to know that when a young CEO shows up before you do, smiles, and says he has a small matter to discuss, it's never small. Chase spoke with the kind of confidence only the untested have. He talked about the future, restructuring, vision, efficiency, buzzwords lined up like soldiers in a sales pitch. I didn't interrupt. I even smiled when he said modernization. I'd heard it too many times to count. It was the first symptom of decline. Clara, he said, pausing just long enough to fake sincerity. The board believes we need a more dynamic structure, a new generation of leadership, and perhaps it's time for a transition. Transition. The polite synonym for execution. He was firing me, sugar-coated in corporate civility. I didn't ask why, didn't argue, didn't stall. Every word he spoke had already been written in my head long before he opened his mouth. I was just curious how he'd phrase it, how he'd sound most self-assured while twisting the knife. When he slid the paper toward me, I recognized the handwriting. HR's assistant, the same woman who'd emailed me last night, wishing me a productive morning. Every detail was perfectly arranged, like one of the spreadsheets I'd built for him 2 months ago. I picked up the pen, glanced at the last line. Effective immediately. And I remembered Elliot Ardent, the founder, telling me late one night in the old office, integrity will outlive us all. He'd been right. Integrity lasts longer than titles, longer than the men who think they hold the power. I signed. Not a word. Chase exhaled, like a man relieved to survive a difficult task. He murmured something about a smooth transition, about how the company valued my contributions. I heard the pen tap the table, the soft scrape of his coffee cup moving aside, the chair legs brushing the floor as I stood. I looked straight at him. No anger, no smile, just silence. People like Chase fear silence. His lips parted, maybe to offer one more platitude, but I stopped him with my eyes. Nothing more needed to be said. I walked out, down the glass corridor where younger employees hunched over their screens. No one looked up. Within 10 minutes, they'd all hear the news. They'd whisper, then go back to work like nothing had happened. The world keeps turning, but I knew. Something had just shifted, ever so slightly, off its axis. Outside, the morning mist still lingered. I paused by my car, pulled out my phone, and checked the meeting log. The irony of technology. Everything leaves a timestamp. The meeting started at exactly 8 and ended at 8:17. I opened my Notes app and typed a single line. Termination confirmed. 8:17 a.m. I saved it under my private account, completely outside the company network. Old habit. Elliot had taught me long ago, every action needs a trace, and every trace can become evidence. When the engine started, soft piano music filled the car. I sat there for a few seconds, my hand resting on the wheel, breathing steady and calm. No rage, no fear, just a precise, focused stillness. Like the clock had just hit a mark I'd been waiting for. He thought he'd ended an era. He didn't realize he'd just triggered what Eliot once called the moral chain reaction, a self-protecting system built into the company's foundation, something the new generation never understood because they never bothered reading the fine print. I drove away, leaving behind the glass tower shimmering like water under the morning light. No one knew what was on my mind, but inside, gears had already started turning. He thought he'd fired me. In truth, he'd just started the countdown. I pulled over, turned off the engine, and watched the sunlight slide across the windshield. Everything was quiet, except for the faint ticking of the clock inside the car, reminding me that time was already moving. If you're listening to this, maybe you've been in that moment too, when someone thinks they've erased you, but all they've really done is give you a reason to begin again. Tell me, where are you listening from? And if you believe revenge is best served with intelligence, not anger, hit subscribe and stay with me. Because what happened after 9 that morning was only the beginning. I turned onto the road leading out of downtown Seattle, the same one Elliot used to drive with me years ago when we were still dreamers working out of an old garage. Morning mist hung over Lake Union, and for a moment I could almost hear his voice beside me, steady, warm, and unshakable. Integrity will outlive us all, Clara. Never let it be stolen, not even by someone who bears the Ardent name. Back then, I just laughed. Elliot always had a flair for the dramatic, as if he could already see the future written out ahead of him. But now, sitting in my car, less than 2 miles from the Ardent Technologies headquarters, I knew he'd been right. 15 years. That's how long I gave to Ardent, to the systems I built, the frameworks I created to make sure the company could run smoothly even without me. I once thought that was duty. Now I understand it was insurance for myself. When I first joined Ardent, it was just 7 of us in Elliot's garage. We coded on battered laptops, taped a whiteboard to the wall, and lived on cold pizza through the night. Elliot wasn't like other founders. He didn't talk about growth or speed. He talked about the moral architecture of technology. Technology, he used to say, is nothing but a mirror of human nature. If people fail, the system fails. So we don't just code ethics into the product, we code it into the process. I was the one who made that real. I designed an operational network that defined every boundary: who could approve, who could sign, and who could terminate. Every process had 2 layers of protection: technical and ethical. Elliot called it the Ardent Framework. By our 7th year, when the company finally made headlines, Elliot asked me to rewrite the founding charter. I still remember that night, just the 2 of us in the office. He placed a draft in front of me, more than 20 pages long, and said, "Clara, I want to add one final clause, a safeguard." I read the first line and laughed. "The integrity reversion clause? Elliot, it sounds like you're afraid this company will one day betray itself. Not if, when." He didn't even look up, his eyes still fixed on the monitor. "And when that day comes, I want someone inside the system sane enough to pull the brake." I hesitated. The clause meant that if leadership ever violated Ardent's core principles, like terminating a key executive without full board approval, operational control would automatically transfer to a trust. The designated person could activate it, and that person was me. I told him he trusted me too much. Elliot smiled. "I don't trust people. I trust systems, and you're the one who understands this system best." In 2018, when the company had grown past 3,000 employees, we updated the clause together and made it legally binding through our attorney, Nora Benson. It was signed, notarized, and stored in 2 originals, one in legal, the other in the Ardent Trust. I never touched it again until now. When Elliot had his stroke, everything began to shift. First, it was subtle: meetings postponed, major approvals quietly reassigned. Then the board started mentioning a name: Chase Halpern, Elliot's distant nephew, armed with a Stanford MBA and a TED Talk titled Leadership in Motion. I still remember the first time I met Chase. He walked into the office with a bright smile and an expensive watch. He shook my hand and said he'd heard of me, the woman who kept Arden's heart beating. Back then, I thought he was charming. Now, I know I was being generous. In his first year, Chase kept me busier than anyone before him. He wanted to shorten approval chains, strip away redundant checks, and move our internal systems to third-party cloud platforms. I objected. He nodded, smiled, and did it anyway. Once he asked me, "Clara, if this system ever collapses, what do you think will save us, people or process?" I said, "People can betray, processes can't." He laughed. "You make it sound like processes have souls." I looked straight at him. "They do, if you know how to write them." From that moment, I knew sooner or later I'd have to use the very system I built, not to keep the company running, but to save it from the man arrogant enough to think he could break every rule. The morning he fired me, I wasn't surprised, only by how early he did it, weeks before I expected. But that was good, because everything I needed was already in place. When my car stopped at a red light, I looked at the Ardent building in the rearview mirror, a cold glass monolith reflecting the morning sky. Inside were people I once called teammates, now just lines of code running in a machine I had written. and somewhere on the top floor, Chase was finishing his lukewarm latte, thinking he'd won. My fingers brushed against the old USB drive in my pocket. Inside it was the original copy of the Integrity Reversion Clause. Elliot once told me, "When that day comes, remember, no shouting, no anger. Just follow the process." I started the car. The light turned green, and I knew the process had just begun. The Ardent office in the morning always carried a familiar scent: coffee, printer ink, and the cold reflection of light off glass walls. I walked in like a ghost, no longer authorized, but still knowing every corner, every face. No one noticed. I moved slowly past the operations floor, where the new hires typed furiously, eyes glued to their screens, as if the outside world had ceased to exist. I still had one part of the system, even after my access was revoked. A small loophole, one I had built myself years ago, labeled as an emergency fallback. No one understood the system better than I did, and no one realized that buried deep inside the audit software, its original creator still had a backdoor. One that required only two-step verification to open the entire log archive. The next morning, I received an email notifying me that system privileges had been updated. I no longer had clearance to view budget data, strategic plans, or legal reports. I read the message and smiled. Chase was doing exactly what I wanted. When a young executive believes he can control everything by changing passwords, it means he's about to lock himself inside. I spent the morning reviewing the old documents I had kept privately. Each file bore the same names as our past projects, but inside were the pieces I'd chosen to protect. In another folder, I opened the copy of the Ardent Charter, the original founding document Elliot and I had written together. The bold text was still there, clear and unshaken. All executive-level personnel decisions must be approved by the full board, except in emergencies documented with signatures from 2 founding members. Chase didn't have that record. I knew, because I had once overseen every step of the company's digital signature process. The system couldn't generate a valid record without dual verification, and the second key was mine. While I was scanning through the files, the office door opened softly. Evelyn Tran, my former assistant, peeked in. She looked uneasy, her dark eyes catching the light from above. "You're still coming here?" she whispered. "Just grabbing a few personal things." I closed the laptop. "Don't worry, he won't notice." Evelyn glanced around, lowering her voice even more. They're talking about wiping the entire operations framework. Chase wants to delete the old logs to refresh the data. It gave me chills just hearing it." I paused. "When?" "This weekend," I nodded. "Thank you, Evelyn." She hesitated at the door. "I don't want to get involved, but if you need anything from the system, my temporary access still works until the end of the day." I looked at her long enough to remember that even among the restless young, some still understood what was right. I'll remember that. When she left, I sat alone in the dim light, reopened my laptop, and clicked on the last folder. Its name was simple: Continuity. Inside was the file no one remembered, the Integrity Reversion Clause. I hovered over it, my pulse steady. When I clicked, the screen flashed. Access confirmed. AR01E. I exhaled slowly. The authorization still worked. Elliot had planned further ahead than even I'd guessed. The clause wasn't just legal text, it was an automated sequence, linking HR, the company trust, and legal operations. Once triggered properly, it would notify the Ardent Trust Council and mirror all current executive data for safekeeping. I read through every line again to ensure nothing was missing. Elliot's signature trembled slightly, but it was still firm. Next to it was mine, clean and deliberate. By the time I closed the laptop, sunlight had begun spilling through the glass. Outside, Seattle was waking up, the streets filling with people who had no idea that just hours earlier I'd been cut out of the place I built. But I wasn't angry, I was alert. At noon, I sat in the cafe below the building, the one Elliot used to love. My Americano cooled slowly, and in the dim reflection of the glass, I saw my own face. A woman in her 40s, calm, eyes steady, untouched by bitterness. I knew better than anyone. When they call you obsolete, that's when you finally have time to prepare. They think you've been replaced, but they forget. You're the underlying code, the part they can't erase. I opened my phone and typed a short note. Clause verified, system confirmed, ready. Outside, a light rain began to fall. I stood, pulled my coat close, and before leaving, looked up toward the top floor where Chase was sitting with the board. The glass glowed under the lights, hiding their faces, but I could imagine his smug expression as he talked about modernization. Go ahead, Chase, I murmured, because I've programmed the system to hear every word you say. Then I walked out, not looking back. In my mind, only one sentence echoed, sharp and precise as the ticking clock from the morning before. It was time for the process to begin. The next morning, Seattle was wrapped in a thick, heavy fog, as if the entire city refused to wake up. I rose earlier than usual, brewed a cup of black coffee, and sat by the window, watching the mist thin across the skyline. Everything in my mind was arranged neatly, one step after another, like a sequence of commands waiting to be executed. On the table, the old silver USB lay beside a thick folder. I'd reviewed it countless times through the night. Every signature, every notarized seal, every annotation, flawless. Elliot once told me, when a system is built right, it will defend itself. People only need the courage to flip the switch. Today, I would flip that switch. I started the car and drove toward the notary's office by Lake Union, the same place where Elliot had signed the final section of Arden's charter back in 2010. The air inside the car was so still I could hear my own heartbeat. Not anxious, just focused. I knew that one wrong move could nullify the clause forever. The office looked exactly the same. Dark wooden walls, warm yellow lights, the faint scent of new paper. Mr. Bernard, the elderly notary in his 60s, looked up as I entered. He smiled gently, the kind of smile that belongs to someone who already knows what's about to happen. Clara Hayes, he said in his gravelly voice. I was wondering when you'd be back. I came to re-verify an old file, I replied. The one Elliot signed with me. I believe you still remember. He nodded, adjusting his glasses. Of course. He called it the company's final insurance policy. I placed the folder on the desk. He opened it and turned each page carefully. When he reached my signature, he paused, took out a fresh notary seal, and looked up. Are you sure, Clara? Once I stamp this, there's no going back. I met his eyes. If Elliot were alive, he'd do the same thing. He didn't argue. He simply pressed the seal, signed, and slid the file back toward me. I took the USB, plugged it into the computer on his desk, and logged into the Ardent Trust's secure portal. The familiar black screen appeared with white letters. Enter access code. I typed AR01E. Verification required. I opened my two-factor app, scanned the barcode. A soft beep echoed. Then the screen flashed. Integrity reversion clause. Status, pending activation. Just as I was about to confirm, the screen flickered and went dark. I frowned. That had never happened before. Then red text appeared. Security lock. Unauthorized. Access detected. Chase. He'd activated the company's new security layer, one I no longer had formal clearance for. I pressed my lips together, calm. It was a contingency I had already accounted for. I turned to Mr. Bernard. Do we still have a backup channel? He nodded, slowly pulling open a drawer. From it, he retrieved a small device, an old encrypted key drive from Arden's early days. Elliot left this with me, he said, in case the system ever failed. But it only works once, and only if it's you who activates it. I took it, the metal warm in my hand, plugged it into the auxiliary port. A faint light blinked on. The computer rebooted and new text appeared. Clean, steady, unmistakable. Access restored. Secondary channel. Founder authorization detected. I entered the code again. 1 second. 2. Then the final line appeared. Integrity clause. Active. Countdown. 72 Huntu 2. I said nothing. Mr. Bernard removed his glasses, eyes soft. That's it then. For now, I replied. It will notify Ardent Trust and mirror the entire executive database. Chase will know within hours, but that's fine. I want him to know. I stepped outside into the rain. The drizzle was light, cold, and almost clear. I paused, checked my phone. A system alert had already arrived. Clause activation registered, 715943 remaining. I stared at the numbers counting down, then slipped the phone into my coat pocket. There was something deeply peaceful about knowing that time was finally on my side. On the drive back, I thought of Chase. Right now, he was probably sitting in that top floor conference room, talking about bold innovation and the future of leadership. Maybe he believed he'd cut away the outdated past, prove himself to the board. But he didn't know that beneath his feet, the foundation was shifting, quietly, precisely, irreversibly. At the next red light, I caught my reflection in the windshield. My face looked calm, cold, no trace of anger, only clarity. This wasn't revenge. It was the system doing what it was designed to do. I opened my notes app and typed a single line. Clause activated, verified. Countdown initiated. 7159. Then I locked the screen and let silence swallow the rest of the morning. What I didn't know was that, at that very moment, on Ardent's top floor, Chase had just received his first alert from the legal system. An integrity reversion clause has been activated. He would panic, and I would simply smile in silence, because from now on, every second he lived belonged to the countdown I had just set in motion. I didn't have to wait long for the news. Less than 2 hours after leaving the notary's office, my phone started vibrating nonstop. Not from anyone I expected, but from the exact sources I'd predicted. Contacts still inside the company, a few friends from the legal department, and one anonymous message that simply said, "They know." I was sitting at a small cafe by Green Lake, the place Elliot used to go whenever he needed to hear the sound of silence. I took a slow sip of coffee and watched the mist dissolve over the water. Everything was unfolding exactly as planned. The system had sent a notice to both Ardent's legal board and the Ardent Trust. Integrity clause has been activated. Chase had to be panicking. He was, and faster than I'd imagined. Around noon, Evelyn messaged me through an encrypted account I'd once taught her how to use. "He's furious. They're in the executive room. Chase just ordered the IT team to lock down every unknown access point in the system." I smiled and typed back, "Don't get involved. Let it run its course." In my mind, I could see it clearly. Chase in the boardroom, tie loosened, voice cracking between anger and fear. He'd be shouting about unauthorized triggers, demanding an investigation. He thought I was hacking the system. What he didn't understand was that I didn't need to hack anything. I'd simply let the system follow its own design, the one I built. He'd summon it, shouting for emergency trace mode. I could almost hear the frantic typing, the clicks, someone muttering, "This is an internal file." There's no sign of external breach. That answer would drive him mad. By 3 in the afternoon, an internal post appeared on Ardent's employee forum. Rumors about the activation of an old internal clause are inaccurate. The company continues normal operations. Rumors. I actually laughed. When a company has to issue a statement saying a rumor isn't true, it usually means it's entirely true. Like every young CEO, Chase thought he could control a fire with PR. He had the communications team issue a press release claiming that a former executive, no longer affiliated with the company, mistakenly triggered an outdated internal clause. He even added, "We are working with legal authorities to resolve this matter." I saw the post on LinkedIn an hour later. It spread quickly, shared by former employees who added comments like, "If that clause is real, Arden's in serious trouble." And it was, because his press release had just triggered the next safeguard, a protocol I'd coded years ago. Any public statement referencing Ardent's executive structure automatically sent a copy to the board and to the legal trustees overseeing Ardent Trust. Within 2 hours, my activation record had been verified a second time. Evelyn messaged again, "PR's in chaos. The board wants the original charter. Chase is losing it. He's saying someone betrayed him." I replied, "No one betrayed him. He's just talking." Too much. I remembered the day he'd smiled at me and said, Clara, the company needs to modernize. Everything's too slow, too rigid. I'd told him gently, slow isn't weak. Slow is control. Now he was learning that lesson the hard way. I left the cafe and walked toward the streetcar stop. The city was calm, oblivious to the quiet war unfolding at the top of Ardent's tower. Another message from Evelyn popped up. They're calling in outside counsel from California. They're trying to find a way to invalidate the clause. I stopped on the sidewalk, watching people pass by. Invalidate. The word made me laugh out loud. You can't invalidate something built to protect itself. Elliot and I had written the clause in a hybrid of legal and technical language. Once activated, any modification or delay required unanimous board approval plus confirmation from the founding trust. And the board couldn't convene without 24 hours' notice. I'd trapped them inside a loop they couldn't escape. Back home, I opened my laptop and logged into Ardent Trust's data review portal. A new message blinked at the top of the screen. Clause activation confirmed. Awaiting board review. 70-21-07 remaining. I leaned back, glanced at the clock. Time was steady. While Chase scrambled to contain the fallout, all I had to do was watch. That evening, Evelyn sent a short audio file. Chase's voice filled the room, sharp with rage. What the hell is she doing? Call the lawyers. Shut down every account. I don't want the name Clara Hayes appearing anywhere in our system again. A quieter voice, probably the head of IT, answered, hesitant. Sir, we've tried. All her accounts were locked this morning. There's no sign of any login activity. It seems the clause was triggered from inside, not from outside. The silence that followed was almost satisfying. I could picture Chase's face, tight jaw, darting eyes, searching for someone to blame. I stopped the recording, saved it in a folder labeled Documentation. Then I opened my Notes app and typed another line. PR campaign initiated. Backfired as expected. Outside, rain whispered against the window. The city lights blurred behind the drops, and I could almost feel it, a volcano stirring quietly beneath the glass towers. And somewhere inside that volcano, Chase still thought he could hold back the fire. But he'd forgotten one thing. Once a system begins to correct itself, no one can stop it. I closed my laptop, poured myself a glass of white wine, and whispered to the still air. This phase was over. The counterstrike was complete. What came next would be damage control, just not mine, his. The next morning, I woke before dawn. Not out of tension. I'd never felt calmer. Everything was running exactly as designed. The clause was active. The chain reaction had begun. And now all I had to do was let the system carry out its next phase. I brewed coffee, opened my laptop. The familiar line appeared as soon as the screen lit up. Integrity clause. 48-03-12 remaining. A cold, steady countdown, precise to the second. I knew that right now, in Ardent's offices, Chase was awake with his legal team, doing everything he could to stall it. Around 7, I got a call from Nora Benson, Elliot's old attorney. Her voice was rough but steady, the tone of someone who had already foreseen this. Clara, I've reviewed the founding files, she said. The clause is entirely valid. Chase can't stop it unless he proves your termination was justified and approved by the full board, and from what I see, he doesn't have that. I know, I replied. But he'll try. He's arrogant enough to believe he can. Then let him try, Nora said with a hint of laughter. You've got every record, and I've got the notarized copy from 2018. More importantly, you have something he doesn't. Time. I stayed quiet for a moment after hanging up. Her words echoed in my mind. You have time. She was right. He was the one running out. By noon, Evelyn had sent me an internal email forwarded through an indirect channel. Chase had hired a private law firm from California, Bell & Co., to re-examine the clause's validity. They were hunting for loopholes, any procedural flaw that might delay the transfer of authority. In the email, one of Bell & Comey's lawyers wrote, if there are any formal discrepancies in the original documentation, such as a missing seal or mismatched signature, we can request a judicial suspension of the clause pending investigation. A faint smile crossed my face. They'd find something, of course, but they didn't realize I'd anticipated that, too. Later that afternoon, Nora called again. Clara, he's just requested an audit of the 2009 copy. Looks like they noticed a missing seal on one of the digital backups. I know, I said. That's a duplicate, not the original. The 2018 version was recertified, signed by Elliot and by me. I've kept the physical copy. You still have it? Nora asked, surprised. I have two, I said calmly. One is locked at home, the other sealed with ardent trust, along with a recorded verification. Elliot never built anything without a second layer of defense. She chuckled softly through the phone. I should have known you wouldn't leave a loose end. After the call, I opened my safe and took out the sealed folder wrapped in plastic. Inside, the red notary stamp was clear, the signatures smooth and aligned, Elliot's and mine. I laid it on the table, took a photo, and sent it to Nora. A minute later, she replied with 3 words, "Game over." But to me, it was only halftime. That evening, Chase held an internal meeting. Wasn't there, but thanks to Evelyn, I had the recording. His voice was strained, laced with frustration. We need to prove this clause can't be enforced. They claim the 2018 version is valid, but who verified it? Clara Hayes? She's no longer employed. That makes it invalid. Another voice, Lisa, the in-house counsel, responded. But sir, the 2018 version bears Elliot's signature. He was still the founder. Clara only witnessed it and maintained the framework. That actually makes 2018 stronger than 2009. No, Chase snapped. There has to be another way. I can't let a former employee hold operational control. Check her record. Find something, anything that discredits her. I don't care what it is. Just give me grounds to void her authority. Silence followed. Then Lisa's voice, quiet and uneasy. Are you asking me to fabricate evidence? A few seconds of pause. Then Chase's tone dropped. No, just expand the investigation. Find anything that undermines her credibility. I stopped the recording there. Part of me almost pitied him, not because he was cornered, but because he still thought he could win. I forwarded the audio to Nora. She replied instantly, "Perfect. If he tries to invent a justification, we'll have proof of obstruction. I'll file the 2018 confirmation now." I turned toward the window. Seattle's night stretched wide, headlights glinting off the wet streets. The clock on my screen read 23:45:12 remaining. I nodded to myself. For a brief moment, I remembered Elliot's words. When people underestimate paperwork, that's your battlefield. I closed my laptop and took a sip of white wine. The battlefield had chosen sides. I just needed to wait one more day. As for Chase, he was tangled in the web of rules I'd woven long ago, trying to cut his way out, never realizing that every string he severed only tied him tighter. When I went to bed, the countdown still ticked across the screen. 23 hours, 44 minutes, 52 seconds. I smiled, turned off the light, and let the system do its work. Monday morning light filtered through the thin curtains of my Seattle apartment, cold, pale, and colorless. I opened my eyes before the alarm could sound. On the desk, my laptop was still open, its screen displaying the numbers I had nearly memorized. 12 untwagged, 43 remaining. Half a day left, just half a day more. I poured my coffee and reopened my email. More than 20 unread messages waited, most from Nora, a few from Evelyn, and several from internal ardent addresses I technically no longer had access to. The subject line of the first one made me pause. Emergency board meeting, 9:00 a.m. The ardent board had decided to meet. Chase was making his final move. I knew what he'd try. He'd attempt to argue that the clause was merely symbolic, that Elliot never intended for it to be legally binding. He'd talk about restructuring, modernization, innovation, all the empty words he used to hide the panic underneath. I texted Nora. I assume he's going to make a scene. Let him. She replied with a single line, "Already ready. I'll be there." I wasn't in the room, but Evelyn, as always, sent me a hidden recording. She was still my eyes inside that glass tower. Chase's voice came first, sharp, strained. "We all know why we're here today. A former employee has exploited a loophole in an old charter clause to threaten this company's stability. I want the board to understand that this clause holds no legal weight. It was written under a completely different context. when Ardent was just a small startup, not the global enterprise it is now. A female voice interrupted, Lisa, the company's in-house counsel, but the clause was updated in 2018, signed by Elliott, and reaffirmed in the Ardent Trust files. The fact that Ms. Hayes was terminated without full board approval automatically triggered it. We can't ignore that. Lisa, Chase shot back, his voice rising. That's ridiculous. She was just an operations manager, not a founder. Elliott never intended to give control to an employee. Then came another voice, board member Mr. Laird. Do you have proof of that? Because I have here a note from Elliott dated 2019, where he wrote, Clara understands the system better than anyone. If things ever go wrong, she knows how to restore them. A silence followed. I could picture Chase's face, eyes wide, lips pressed tight, trying to swallow his growing panic. He finally managed, with forced calm, with all due respect, that's a personal note, a compliment, not a legal directive. Then Nora spoke, her tone composed and precise. Elliott never wrote compliments in company records. Mr. Laird can confirm that. Every line he wrote served a purpose. And if we need proof, I have the certified scan here, signed and notarized on video. Furthermore, the clause was validated by both founding board members at the time, one of whom still sits on this board. There was a soft scraping sound, someone shifting their chair. Then the familiar voice of Mr. Jenkins, one of the original members. I signed that clause, and I remember exactly why Elliott wanted it. He feared this very scenario, a relative with no understanding of the founding principles taking control without oversight. Chase snapped. A relative? I'm his nephew. I have the right. Nora's voice stayed calm. Blood isn't a right, Chase. A signature is, and you don't have one. Silence stretched. Then Chase spoke again, quieter but dripping with venom. Clara Hayes is manipulating all of you. She's just a bitter ex-employee. I refuse to believe Elliott would entrust her with this company's future. Nora didn't respond right away. I heard the faint rustle of paper, then her steady voice. I have here the official confirmation from the Ardent Trust. If the board consents, I'll present the original document. It names the individual designated under Clause 4.8 in the event of activation. Mr. Laird's voice. Present it. Chase immediately cut in. Wait, I object. We don't need... Objection doesn't apply here, Nora interrupted. The board has the right to review evidence. The sound of an envelope opening. Then a long, weighted silence. I heard someone exhale, a chair creak. Finally, Meredith, the board chair, spoke. We've read the name in the document. I confirm the clause is valid, notarized, and authenticated by Ardent Trust. Chase's voice came next, low, cracking. The name... Who is it? No one answered at first. I imagined the boardroom frozen, glances darting, someone summoning the courage to speak. Then Nora's voice, soft but unwavering. The designated successor is Clara M. Hayes. The silence that followed was almost physical. Then Chase laughed, a hollow, broken sound. No. No, that's impossible. She was just an operations manager. Meredith cut him off. That's the truth, Chase. And if the clause stands, and legal counsel confirms that it does, then in 12 hours, operational authority transfers automatically. Unless Elliott objects in writing, the process completes. Chase's voice trembled. He wasn't in his right mind. Sufficiently lucid to sign the 2018 documents, Nora said, her tone like steel. And he chose her. The recording ended with the crash of a chair and a door slamming shut. I replayed the final minutes twice. Not out of triumph, but to make sure of one thing. Nora's voice never shook. Every word was steady, lawful, final. On my screen, the countdown read 11:12:08. The apartment was quiet, only the wind outside the window. I took a sip of coffee, my chest still and calm. Elliott had once told me that true victory isn't in toppling someone. It's when the system restores its own balance. Now, the system was doing exactly that. And Chase, he still didn't realize that every desperate move he made only pushed the process forward. I opened my notes app and typed one final line. Board confirmed clause validity. 11 hours remaining. Process irreversible. Then I closed the laptop, leaned back, and whispered to myself, Elliot, I've flipped the switch. The rest is up to the system now. Tuesday morning in Seattle was flat and gray, the light slipping through the clouds like strands of silver silk. I sat in my car, parked 2 blocks from Ardent Technologies headquarters. The dashboard clock read 7:42 a.m. On my phone screen, a small timer in the corner ticked down with mechanical precision. 001806 remaining. 18 minutes. Just 18 more minutes, and the clause would complete. I stared at the glass tower ahead, the place that had once been my entire world. Inside, Chase was surely struggling against the board. He'd make one last attempt, because men who've never learned to lose always do. At 7:58, a message arrived from Nora. The courier has arrived. The board is assembling. You should come in. I drew a deep breath and opened the door. A light drizzle had started, fine as smoke. I walked quickly through the main entrance, past the revolving doors, the air cold and still. The receptionist nodded politely, surprise flickering in her eyes, but no one stopped me. My name was still listed under Legacy Access, a small detail Chase had forgotten to revoke. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor was silent. When the doors slid open, 2 security officers stood in the hallway, stone-faced. They didn't speak, just gave a brief nod as I passed. At the end of the corridor, the conference room stood open, flooded with white light. Everyone was already there. The board sat around the long table, papers neatly stacked, untouched coffee cooling beside them. At the head sat Meredith, the board chair, calm, steady. Beside her stood Nora, a large yellow envelope before her. Across the table, Chase leaned forward on his hands, shirt wrinkled, hair disheveled, eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night. I stepped inside without a word. No one asked who I was or why I was there. The air had already shifted. Gravity itself seemed to tilt toward my side of the room. Meredith looked at me and nodded. Ms. Hayes, thank you for coming. We'll begin promptly at 8. Chase let out a hoarse laugh. She doesn't need to be here. This is a farce. That clause, it's outdated, symbolic, meaningless. Nora opened the envelope and withdrew a stack of documents. Members of the board, per the Ardent Charter, Section 4.8, the Integrity Reversion Clause has been lawfully activated. The 72-hour period has concluded. I am submitting certified confirmations from Ardent Trust and Bernard Associates Notary. Her tone was even, controlled. The sound of paper sliding against the table was sharper than any accusation. Chase scoffed. She orchestrated all of this, every bit of it. She hacked the system and— No hacking was necessary, Nora interrupted. The system triggered automatically once the conditions were met. Ms. Hayes merely completed the procedure that Elliot Arden himself authored. And as of now, the clause holds full legal authority. Meredith nodded. I have reviewed all materials. The signatures, notary stamps, and verification codes match. Per the charter, operational control of Ardent Technologies transfers to the designee named in the Ardent Trust. The room fell silent. The wall clock ticked once. 8 o'clock. The door opened. A security officer stepped in, carrying another sealed envelope, this one marked with the blue wax seal of Ardent Trust. He placed it before Meredith. She broke the seal and read slowly, each word deliberate. By directive of the Ardent Trust and under Section 4.8 of the Founding Charter, operational authority of Ardent Technologies is hereby transferred to Clara M. Hayes, effective immediately. Chase slammed his pen onto the table, his voice cracking. No, you can't do this. This is my company. I took a step forward, meeting his gaze. You never built this company, Chase. You inherited a chair you never understood. Elliot gave you a chance, and you turned it into a monument to yourself. He glared at me. You think you've won? I haven't won anything. I've only restored balance. The system corrected itself. I took the empty seat beside Meredith, the seat of the chief executive. The room was utterly still. I inserted the silver USB into the presentation terminal. The wall screen came alive, displaying Ardent's internal dashboard. In the corner, one line glowed clearly. Operational control, Clara M. Hayes. Active. No one spoke. Only the soft hum of ventilation and the steady tick of the clock. Chase stood motionless, his breath shallow. Then he exhaled and said brokenly, "You're really giving her the company? A former employee? Someone obsessed with ethics? The world doesn't run on ethics, it runs on speed and profit." I looked at him, voice quiet and steady. Maybe. But what keeps a company alive isn't profit, it's trust. And trust can't be optimized. He gave a dry, bitter laugh and stepped back. "You'll destroy it. You're not ruthless enough for this world." I rose to face him. Eliot once said, "Integrity isn't gentle, Chase. It's steel." Meredith nodded once. "This meeting is adjourned. The board will record the transfer in the official register. From this moment, all executive decisions fall under the new chief executive officer." I heard the rustle of papers as each board member signed the confirmation. When the final signature was done, Meredith turned to me. "Congratulations, Clara. The system chose correctly." I simply nodded. There was no triumph, only a strange, quiet steadiness, like watching a machine return to perfect calibration after years of drift. Chase stood at the door, anger still flickering in his eyes, but beneath it, recognition. For the first time, he understood the truth. This was never his game to win. As he turned to leave, I spoke softly, just loud enough for him to hear. "Chase, you once said you wanted to modernize the company. Well, it's been renewed, not through technology, but through the memory of its founder. Goodbye." He paused for a second, then walked out, the door closed behind him, sealing a silence thick enough to feel. I removed the USB, folded my hands, and looked out through the glass wall. The city of Seattle was veiled in mist, calm and pale, as if no storm had ever passed. Only one thought filled my mind. The system has healed itself. I opened my laptop and logged into the internal network. On the screen, a message appeared. "Welcome, CEO." And just below it, the final timestamp. The countdown frozen, its digits still, 8 o'clock sharp. The moment everything ended, and the moment everything began again. I left the boardroom just as the clock on the wall struck 8:15. The hallway stretched ahead, light reflecting off the glass floor in soft, shifting bands. The younger employees I once worked beside lowered their heads as I passed, not out of obligation, but because they could feel that something fundamental had changed. On the lower floors, the communications department was in chaos. A small crowd had gathered around the main screen where the breaking news headlines scrolled across the ticker. Ardent Technologies announces leadership transfer. New CEO, former operations director, Clara Hayes. The words rolled by, like a dream I'd already lived once before. Evelyn was waiting for me in the lobby, her expression a mix of disbelief and relief. She handed me an envelope. "This is from Nora," she said softly. "She told me you should read it once you're home." I nodded. "Thank you, Evelyn, and thank you for staying when everything started to fall apart." She smiled faintly. "I just followed the person who understood this system better than anyone else." Outside, the Seattle air was cool and clean. The rain had stopped, leaving behind the scent of wet concrete and cedar. I stood on the sidewalk for a few quiet seconds, looking up at the glass tower reflecting the pale morning light, the place where I'd spent nearly half my life building something that still mattered. In front of the building, Chase's car was gone. I knew he wouldn't come back. He was probably talking to lawyers, convincing himself this was temporary. But he would learn soon enough. There is no temporary in a system built for permanence. When I returned to my apartment by the lake, the sun was high. I set Nora's envelope on the table, brewed a cup of ginger tea, and opened it. Inside were two items: a certified copy of the official transfer from Ardent Trust and a small, handwritten note from Nora. The message, neat and slanted, read, "Elliot once told me that if the company ever lost its direction, the only person clear-headed enough to bring it back was you. He called you the guardian." I think he was right. I set the note down and leaned back in my chair, eyes on the rippling water outside. What I felt wasn't joy, it was stillness. a quiet depth. Maybe after all these years, this wasn't an ending at all, but a recovery phase, like a system rebooting after a long shutdown. That afternoon, I went back to the office. No one asked me to, but Ardent had been my home for almost 2 decades. I entered using my old badge, and the gate slid open smoothly, as if it had never been locked. In the executive suite, nothing of Chase remained except a forgotten coffee cup. I set it on the tray and powered on the central screen. The interface glowed to life, and in the top corner, a message appeared. Welcome back, Clara. Integrity mode active. I opened the internal communications hub. Hundreds of unread messages filled the screen, many from people who had once stayed. Silent, now sending short notes. Welcome back. Hope we can rebuild. Thank you for keeping Elliot's vision alive. I didn't reply to each one. Instead, I opened a new message and began to type a company-wide announcement. Subject: Steady hands, clear eyes. Ardent will not return to the past, but we will not rush blindly into the future either. We will rebuild, process by process, person by person, value by value. Not through fear, but through integrity. If you still believe in the reason you chose to be here, then begin again with me. Clara Hayes. I hit send. The alert echoed across every device in the building. Within seconds, the lights across Ardent flickered on in unison. Not in celebration, but in balance. On the main display, the system status updated. Operational status: stable. I sat down in the chair that had once belonged to Chase, and before him, to Elliot. Everything looked the same, except for the small framed photo of Elliot in the corner. I picked it up and wiped away the thin layer of dust. He was smiling, eyes calm, as if still watching over everything. I remembered that last night in the hospital when he had held my hand and whispered, "Integrity must have guardians, Clara, even from itself." Back then, I didn't fully understand. Now I did. Every system, no matter how perfect, needs someone human enough to keep it true. And that was why I was still here. Outside, the rain began again, soft against the windows. I opened one slightly, letting the cool air flow in. For the first time in years, it felt like Ardent was breathing again. On the main screen, the old countdown was gone. Only one static timestamp remained. 8 o'clock a.m., the moment everything changed. I looked at it once more and whispered into the quiet Seattle air, "Thank you, Elliot." I brought it home. Then I turned off the screen and sat in the dim light, letting the rain mix with the rhythm of my breathing. There was nothing more to say. The system had been restored, and I, the one who guarded it, was finally back where I belonged.